Strange memories on this nervous night in Las Vegas. 5 years later, six. Seems like a lifetime, or at least a main era. The kind of peak that never comes again. San Francisco in the middle 60s was a very special time and place to be a part of. Maybe it meant something, maybe not in the long run. But no explanation, no mix of words or music or memories can touch that sense of knowing that you were there and alive in that corner of time and the world, whatever it meant. History is hard to know because of all the hired bullshit. But even without being sure of history, it seems entirely reasonable to think that every now and then the energy of a whole generation comes to a head in a long, fine flash for reasons that nobody really understands at the time, and which never explain in retrospect what really happened. There was madness in any direction at any hour, if not across the bay, then up the Golden Gate or down 101 to Los Altos or La Honda. You could strike sparks anywhere. There was a fantastic universal sense that whatever we were doing was right, that we were winning. And that, I think, was the handle. That sense of inevitable victory over the forces of old and evil, not in any mean or military sense. We didn't need that. Our energy would simply prevail. There was no point in fighting on our side or theirs. We had all the momentum. We were riding the crest of a high and beautiful wave. So now, less than 5 years later, you can go up on a steep hill in Las Vegas and look west. And with the right kind of eyes, you can almost see the high water mark, that place where the wave finally broke and rolled back.
I mean, he would have those reasons that nobody really understands at the time if he just subscribed to historical materialism.
No, I think you should just take some more drugs and he'll figure it out.
99% of dope fiends stop before the ultimate, breakthrough.
Yeah, no, in this book, I kept being like, no, dude, one more upper and you'll be there.
Socialist shelf. Be good books and organize yourself. Socialist shelf. Be good books and organize yourself.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome to the Socialist Shelf. This week, are we doing uppers, Lenore? Caffeine, I guess. I got some caffeine here.
I mean,
That's
I have a monster here. That counts that
well,
counts as a stimulant, certainly.
well, maybe the monster was society the whole time.
I've
That's
had
what
plenty
Thompson would
of.
say.
We're not going crazy tonight. I've had plenty of upper this week, specifically an upper respiratory illness that I'm just coming off of. So if I sound a little bit scuffed, that's why.
It's because you've just been you would you say you're loathing this upper respiratory infection?
Well, I'm no longer fearing it.
You're no longer fearing it, you're just loathing it. Um, you're Las Vegasing it. Um, this week we're talking about Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, 1971. This work of gonzo journalism. It's a novel, folks. It's not really a story that actually happened, nor is he super claiming it is, but we will get into it. Lenore, what was your history with this book and with Hunter S. Thompson, this sort of great American writer, this sort of famed titan of American journalism slash whatever you want to call what this is, gonzo journalism.
Yeah, so I came to Hunter S. Thompson in a way that I think a lot of people did. I first picked up Fear and Loathing in high school. I read a little bit more of his journalism, and I thought, yeah, this is wild. Who does this? This is insane. This is the coolest thing in the world. And then, the other half
Can
of my
you do
lifetime
that?
later, yeah, I mean, very, very few people can, and you hear about functioning alcoholics and whatnot. This guy was like a functioning alcoholic and like six other fucking things. It's honestly insane what this guy was able to consume and for how long. But yeah, coming back to Fear and Loathing now, I think is a really good way to, sort of do a post-mortem on what you think is cool when you're in high school. Because goddamn, like, I'm not gonna say that there's not cool stuff
Oh,
about,
100%. He's a good
but
writer.
yeah, no, he's a fantastic writer. But like, digging into his life and his history and what he was capable of, and how he increasingly cut himself off from that capability, I found really frustrating this week.
Well, for me, I got a creative writing degree, so like, yeah, I read Hunter S. Thompson, like that happens. That's whatever. So I read Fear and Loathing in college, freshman year, I think. We really didn't get into it at all, discussing anything but the sort of language of it, which was a great deep dive that we did, and something that I'll get into later. We talked no politics in that
Really?
particular class.
You didn't even
Uh,
read like Campaign Trail 72?
no, 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 no.
That's
We
the
were,
better book.
yeah, that's from the segments I've read. It feels that way. We really
Mhm.
weren't. I mean, like, it's not that we didn't know it was political, but like our
Mhm.
analysis of it was highly language oriented, which
Sure.
was like also the focus of the class. And then I've read other segments, short stories, this, that, and the other, articles that he's written through the years. But his obituary of Nixon, of course, fantastic,
It rips, yeah.
classic. Um, but this is me kind of coming back to it as someone who is more, I'd say more intelligent, certainly more well-read, certainly more politically developed and nuanced. Uh, and I had a very similar reaction to you, Lenore. Before we get into it, like, this is like cool and it's good to read, and like I'm having a good time reading it. Like, I don't want to act like, oh, I hate this or whatever. But like this book, I got pretty mad by the end of it. And we can talk about why.
It's for it's only like 90 pages or so, but it feels twice as long.
Yeah.
Do you know
There
what
are
I
moments that drag, even though like I did enjoy reading it, but like I like there's a lot of elements about it and about this guy that are very frustrating to me.
do you know what I just noticed? I have a copy of The Great Shark Hunt, which is a compilation of his articles that he wrote in like the 60s and early 70s. Um, And the cover here, folks, for those of you who are listening, it's a knife, and the pommel is a fist holding a flower. It's his campaign insignia for when he was running for sheriff of Aspen, and the crossbar of the knife has it's the word gonzo made into a crossbar. Like it looks like the alternate universe where Hunter S. Thompson turned Aspen into a fascist microstate.
You know, the Great Shark Hunt, more like the Great Shark Hunt. Is this anything? I don't know.
Also,
Uh,
I just noticed that the fist has six fingers.
That's fun. It was AI generated. No. Alternative joke. Something, something Gonzo from the Muppets. I did it, folks. Boom. Gonzo journalism. Look, if Gonzo journalism was Gonzo from the Muppets, like giving his opinion on everything, and we had Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas where it was Gonzo and Rizzo the Rat driving around and doing everything in this book, then it would be probably the greatest thing ever
I
made.
unironically, that is a joke that the Muppets would do. You can see it right now. Him in the
Mhm.
fucking like fisherman hat, the T shades, quote
I would
unquote
not be
fisherman.
surprised if in like one of the episodes of the Muppet Show there was a throwaway joke about that. I've
Mhm.
not. I don't think I'm. I've seen a lot of the Muppet Show, but like not as an adult. So it's very possible that there's a throwaway joke. Not with drugs, but like I could see them being like, "What are you, Hunter S. Thompson?" or something like that. That's
Yeah.
that's definitely something they do. I mean, like literally, there's a whole movie with that running bit of him as Charles Dickens. So like,
Oh yeah, there's
why
there's
not?
always there's always something for the adults in the Muppets. But yeah,
Yeah, namely
so
Miss Piggy, because she's kind of a baddie for real, kind of adult, a baddie for real, for real.
Speaking of baddies, no, I don't have a transition for that.
The S stands for sexy.
There
Hunter
we go.
Sexy Thompson.
Hunter, sexy man Tumblr. No. Let's leave that in the past. Hunter Stockton Thompson. The S stands for Stockton. Born July 18, 1937, 2 days before me. I was born in 1937 too. In Louisville, Kentucky, the oldest of three sons. His mother was a librarian. His father was a public insurance adjuster from a town, this I loved, from a town called Horse Cave.
Horse Cave.
Horse Cave.
AJ Diddy, if you're listening.
That's where they make all the horses. I assume there are corners in there.
Yeah,
Um,
no doubt.
So he lived in a middle income neighborhood that had formerly been a fairly wealthy kind of part of town. And his first wife described him as angry from birth.
Mm.
And you believe this reading a little bit about this guy. His father died when he was about 14. He was just getting into high school. So it was just his mother raising him for most of his life. Um, a childhood friend recalls that like Hunter and his friends would set out with BB guns when they were young and instigate. This is a quote from Gonzo, the oral biography that I read. Little mini race wars with the black neighborhood across the street. Charming. But as much as he liked sports and movies and race wars as a kid, Thompson also liked going to the library to read. He was a big reader, in no small part due to his mother's influence, right? His mother wanted him to pursue something literary, something intellectual, probably to keep him from starting fucking race wars.
Mm.
So he didn't
Good
slow
thing to not
down.
do.
Yeah. Don't go out and start one of those folks. It never ends well.
Yeah.
Um,
Mom, I'm trying to do a race war.
honey, put down the BB gun and pick up your Dickens or whatever it is.
Yeah,
Uh,
please.
he did not slow down in high school though. Like he likes to draw attention to himself.
No
This
way. Yeah.
through a through line thread his entire life. Once on a double date, he disappeared and he came back dressed as an old lady, pretending to be kidnapped by the other couple. That
How
date.
did that end?
Oh, it didn't end well. No, he
Of
didn't.
course not.
That date didn't last much longer than that.
I love imagining what he thought was going to happen.
So did he. So did he.
Mm.
No, like he loved just doing shit and seeing what would happen. And of course, as he grows up and gets access to firearms, of course, that spirals. At his
Mhm.
high school, he joins two clubs. He joins the Castleton Athletic Club and the Athenaeum Literary Association, which are
Anime ass plot. He's in the
yeah.
athletic club and the literary association. What's he going to choose? Slice of
Well, and
life.
like you're not far off the mark because like these are basically frats for high schoolers,
Yeah.
right? You had to rush, you had to be hazed to join. Like, and this literary association in particular is like 125 years old at this point. Like
Hunter
it's
S. Thompson anime win.
yeah, literally. I'll watch that shit. If it's
I won't, but you can
animated,
tell me about it.
if it's animated by the same person who made The Night is Short, Walk On Girl, like that gets that gets pretty psychedelic. But yeah, a lot of upper middle income folks in this area. He himself is not very wealthy, but he grows up adjacent to it, right?
Hmm.
So he's already schmoozing in these circles, but he's eventually voted out for hooliganism, if you can believe
God
that.
damn it. Wait, he's voted out of what? Out of the literary club?
The literary club, yeah.
Voted out of the literary club for hooliganism is what I would like put on my books if I published it. Like, I don't know, good boys and girls beware going into this book, which again is kind of the energy he has.
hmm And especially because everybody but him except him apparently hit a growth spurt in the first half of high school. Like he was kind of smaller than everybody else. Like he learned to use charisma and cunning to impress and occasionally bully people, right?
Mm.
All of his childhood friends talk about what a natural leader that he was. He also had some like congenital issues with his spine, which caused him like sciatica throughout his life, so that kept him
Mm.
from being the best in sports. He would talk about it as a football injury.
Sure.
It
I
also
imagine that contributed to the substance abuse,
to
right?
oh
That
yeah,
that
no,
sort of chronic pain.
he started drinking very, very early. Yes.
Sure.
Now, in the spring of his senior year, relatedly, he's blamed for a gas station robbery. He gets caught buying alcohol underage, and he's picked up as an accessory to a mugging, like hat trick. He's sentenced to 60 days in jail. He serves half of it, and he's barred from taking his finals, so he can't graduate. So he joins the Air Force instead.
And what at what point would this be? This would be in the mid 50s at this point then?
1954. 54, if my math is right,
Great,
54, 55.
great, great.
So while stationed in Florida, he gets transferred from a radar unit to the base newspaper, and he takes up sports writing there, right? So he also writes for a civilian paper under a different name. He's encouraged in his journalism, his creative writing by a lieutenant colonel who is described as a very literary guy. And he isn't too much of a rebel in the Air Force, but he does piss off some favorites at the top brass, and he gets honorably discharged, honorably because he's a good writer. That factors into it. The
Yeah.
last thing he does is an expose on a sexist riot of enlisted men attacking the women's quarters. This riot
God.
did not actually happen. There you can see like his early penchant for spinning yarns, right? Right.
So wait, he made up a riot.
Yeah, he literally just said, yeah, this happened and it was crazy. And like he blends fact with fiction in his journalism, and you kind of have to dig through it to get to the point of what the through line of what he's actually saying. So he moves to Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania, because he hears their newspaper's looking for a sports editor. He doubles down on this exaggerative style of his. Like he has articles about people being carried out of pro wrestling matches with broken backs, right? Which is the joke because it's all staged.
Hey, look, you can say it's all staged, but at time of recording, just a few days ago, Big Big AJ of the Costco guys did participate in a wrestling match that ended in him getting a broken ankle and he still won. So
True.
I think that's worth noting. The broken ankle was real. The wrestling match was not. But this is a pro Costco guys podcast, so I just had to put that out there.
My dad has a great story about how he was over in Japan teaching English in college, and he got into pro wrestling there. And like the role that he played was like, oh yeah, I'm the big like scary American that I'm the bad guy, and the local dude is supposed to fight me and win. But there's one match where like he accidentally knocks the dude out, and he had to be like carried out by security because people were
Oh
so
my
fucking.
Oh my God. Like, nah, never mind. That'll get us way on a tangent. Go ahead.
Yeah, they called him Mad Dog.
I was about to talk about the movie Monkey Man, but
I have to
maybe
fucking
another
see
time.
that.
Good
That's my
movie. But
homework.
yeah.
So the Jersey Shore job lasts till he starts dating the daughter of the editor-in-chief. He borrows his car for a date and he accidentally destroys it. Immediately, he skips town for New York.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
probably a good idea.
Starts taking classes at Columbia, moves in with an Air Force buddy. He doesn't have to pay rent as long as he keeps the place clean. Um, he joins book clubs to scam free
Challenge
books out of them.
impossible if I know about this guy.
It only
Yeah.
gets worse, folks. Like he's super locked in on writing at this point. Like this is the only productive thing he can do for himself. He's living on peanut butter. He's scamming free books out of book clubs, pretending to be insane whenever they try and hit him up for money.
Never stop hustling.
An early exercise of his is like typing out F. Scott Fitzgerald books like and Ernest Hemingway by hand, like just to get a feel, he says, for what it's like to write those words.
Typing out F. Scott Fitzgerald just to feel something.
He's a big fan of like Fitzgerald, Hemingway, like a lot of the classical male writers. Like he doesn't believe that there are serious women writing, which is odd for a man from the South, Willa Cather, like for example.
Yeah.
Um, uh,
And Flannery O'Connor, like,
yeah,
come on. Like
mhm.
he would have been, roughly contemporaries with. Uh yeah, so I didn't know this about Thompson. Thompson didn't believe there were serious women writers, or there had been. What was his deal with that?
He was blazing through the Western like canon at this point, and like he just wasn't interested in the women who contributed to it up to that
And
point.
did he never like change his position on this, or was this a thing he stuck to?
Well, see, and that's where it gets like frustrating because like I feel like I read the wrong book almost because the
Uh-huh.
oral biography was about like him and his relationship to the people around him, but like I have been told by Thompson heads that like look, skip the biographies, read the books of his letters because that gives you a much more interesting look into how he himself evolved, and he did evolve, but like
Sure.
but there are some definite like questionable through lines in his life.
Right, because this
Um,
guy lived to 2005, so it just makes one wonder, living through this period, what and how he was, affected. I mean, especially considering he is a guy who considers himself on the left, whatever that means, which we'll get into. That can mean a whole lot of things, but I don't know.
yeah,
It's interesting, but that doesn't like. there's no dearth of like men who are leftists who still hold sexist tendencies. That's not these things are not mutually exclusive, especially when you're as, unprincipled as sort of the wings of the left that Thompson ran with.
Yeah, unprincipled is a good word for it. He was pretty allergic to any kind of authority and authority rules, just general like rules of like being authority rules, just like general like being a person. Like he there's a few jobs that I'm kind of skimming over that he gets fired from for insubordination and drunkenness, breaking shit at the office. He also didn't like wearing shoes at the office.
Barefoot is legal.
He meets Sandy Thompson around his early 20s. This is his first really serious girlfriend. She would eventually marry him. I forget what her maiden name was. He eventually gets a job at a Puerto Rican bowling magazine. He's 22. He's in San Jose. He's convinced at this point that American journalism has failed. His time is too valuable to waste on it. As as convinced of something as you can be at like 22. Now, as it happens, the owner of this bowling magazine cannot afford to pay him. So in the meantime, he's reading nonstop. He's a big fan of J.D. Salinger as well. This is where he starts writing the Rum Diary. He envisions it as like, okay, I'm doing The Sun Also Rises, but in Puerto Rico. So he's doing
Okay.
Hemingway. He doesn't get it published till like 1998 when he needs the money. He writes a few short stories in the 50s and 60s. None of them have been published, although I hear there's a compilation of these being worked on.
Okay,
Uh,
cool.
he's got a book called Prince Jellyfish that also he never publishes. All we know about
Another anime ass name.
there is an anime called Princess Jellyfish, but it is absolutely for children. So eventually he flees Puerto Rico to dodge breach of peace charges. Somehow he lands a job at a government PR agency writing about tourism, right? That job sends him to Bermuda. He wants to use this opportunity to run off to Europe. He fails. Moves to Cuba briefly, fails. Moves to San Francisco, and he talks his way into being groundskeeper and security guard for Slate's Hot Springs, later to become the Esalen Institute.
Okay.
It's basically a spa for writers, scientists, thinkers. It's not unlike where Cormac McCarthy spent his last days, right?
Hmm.
Aldous Huxley, Ray Bradbury, Joseph Campbell, they all spent time there. Um, Now, they're living fairly cheap there. The rent's only like $15 a month, but he's living on irregular pay for writing magazine articles as well as whatever his girlfriend's mother can spare them. And like many downwardly mobile white sons of settler colonial gentry, he loves small amounts of power. There was an article in the literary journal Beatdom called Hunter S. Thompson, Gonzo Frontiersman, that talks about him like prowling the grounds with a bullwhip and a truncheon, firing guns at all hours, leaving severed animal heads around for people to find. Like, what ultimately gets him kicked off the property is, as I understand it, an article he writes about the party scene at the hot springs, particularly the gay party scene, and the people who own the property don't want to be associated with like all night partying. Um,
Sure. They're not cool. I get it.
yeah, he actually crashes one of those parties that's like a bunch of like middle-aged gay men, and he gets beaten up and almost thrown off a cliff.
Rolled up at the gay party, almost got thrown off a fucking cliff. What do you have to do?
I
I have
mean,
some
just
guesses.
I mean, just go around with firearms and dogs and scare
Mm.
people,
Yeah,
But
you done fucked up now. You messed with the bears.
he fucked around and he found out.
Yeah.
So he and his girlfriend go back to New York. He finds work for several national papers. His girlfriend supports them with a job at a travel agency, and eventually he skips town for Aruba with another woman.
Uh,
And while he's down there, he travels all around South America, writing articles for several papers, sending them back up to the States, having his girlfriend copy them to send them around. Like, and she knows this is going on, right? Now, like I did read a couple of these pieces in the Great Shark Hunt, stuff like why anti-gringo winds often blow south of the border, democracy dies in Peru, but few seem to mourn its passing. They are strikingly honest and like incisive pieces about like imperialism, how wealthy Americans refuse to understand these countries that are ruling class treats as neo-colonies. Like
yeah,
you wouldn't see pieces like these in the New York Times today.
sure.
While he's in South America, Sandy goes on a date with another guy who crashes the motorcycle they're on, puts her in the hospital. Hunter hears about this and breaks up with her immediately. He says, "It's over. You're on a motorcycle with some guy. That's it."
Didn't he run off with another woman?
Ignore that. Ignore that. That doesn't matter.
Okay.
but it doesn't end up mattering because like he lands back in America. He eventually reunites with Sandy. He and his brothers pack her into a car one day, and she says, "Where are we going?" He says, "Indiana." Why? To get married. And they do. 20th of May, 1963.
Okay.
They almost immediately have a kid, Juan Fitzgerald Thompson, named after F. Scott Fitzgerald and John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Only kid of theirs that survives. There are five after that are either miscarriages or they die in infancy. Now, they moved to San Francisco around 65. Thompson gets attention for an article in The Nation that he writes about the Hells Angels, and he gets a contract for a book about this motorcycle gang, right? And he's really, really into the Hells Angels, right? He idolizes outlaw behavior. Like, he thinks at one point that, like, he mentions it in Fear and Loathing, an alliance with this motorcycle gang is going to be, like, the factor that makes or breaks the anti-war movement, like,
Yeah.
bringing in the outlaw, like, lumpen element and, using it as, like, you know, or muscle or whatever. There's a really funny part in Gonzo, by the way, where like this one Hell's Angels chapter leader, I think it might be Sonny Barger himself, says, "Yeah, Hunter Doc's a big game around normal people, but if something criminal kicks off around him, he totally bugs out of there."
Yeah. No, I can imagine that.
Yeah.
I also, there is still like to this day, and again, Hunter is not coming at this from like a left wing perspective or a right wing perspective.
Hmm.
Um, But there's like a thing that's mostly conservative now. That's like, oh, you fucked with the Hells Angels. Like there were those conservative memes that were going around that were like viral that were like, Hells Angels are going to, Ohio to drive off the immigrants. They're fucked now. Or Hells Angels are on the way to the southern border to take care. Like this like weird fetishization of these like, you know, outlaws who are like, seen as like lumpen, but like well off enough to have big motorcycles and like predominantly white, at least in the cultural imagination. I don't know the
Hmm.
actual ethnic makeup of the Hells Angels. I don't know anything about the actual Hells Angels. What I do know is they don't do any of that stuff, right? Like they're basically motorcycle nerds. There have been times where they did more, but like right now, that's what they do, and whatever. Um, but it's kind of there's like this fascinating idea of like there's this army of outlaws that is very like cowboy Lone Ranger coded,
Hmm.
a very part of the American mythos that is, lacks a lot of truth, and in the sense that it ever was true, these sort of forces have always been reactionary when they manifest. Not all lumpen forces, obviously, but this type of, outlaw Western expansion is that's never going to be a left-wing force.
No, no. But he is nonetheless, he's stridently anti-war, right? He signs a pledge by writers and editors not to pay a surtax level to pay for the Vietnam War. Other signatories include Howard Zinn, Philip K. Dick, Noam Chomsky, friend of the show, Kurt Vonnegut. One of the and politics is what really activates him following, journalism about politics specifically. Like one of two times that Sandy ever saw him cry was when he returned from the Democratic National Convention in 68.
Yeah.
And he describes the police brutality as what made him break down, right? He never identified with an organization, he never would, but like he recognized when a particular political form had failed, which was evident as far back as Vietnam and further. He was fascinated by that decay. So he himself gets into politics. He's moved to Woody Creek, Colorado by this time, just outside of Aspen. He runs a vaguely progressive campaign for mayor of Aspen, for a lawyer friend of his, Joe Edwards, who loses by 6 votes. Then he himself runs for sheriff of Pitkin County on a platform of drug decriminalization. This is the pretty funny. He's got a 6 point platform here. Rip up all the city streets with jackhammers. All public movement will be by foot and a fleet of bicycles. Rename Aspen to Fat City to like prevent developers from going there because the name is just bad. Controlled drug sales, like no like profiteering off of drugs, but like drugs are legal. Hunting and fishing should be forbidden to all non-residents, with the exception of those who can obtain the signed endorsement of a resident. Disarm the police, based. And it'll be the policy of the sheriff's office savagely to harass all those engaged in any form of land rape. So, environmental, drug decriminalization, doesn't really fit into a larger sort of leftist platform, but he's got bits and pieces here and there of that policy.
Didn't he say he was like part of the Freak Party or something like that?
The freak power ticket, yeah.
The
Yeah.
Freak Power ticket. If you're in line to vote for the Freak Power ticket, stay in line. This is how Hunter Thompson can still win.
he almost does win, but and this is the thing, right? He's a very good esthetician, right? He shaves his head to look more like a cop so he can call his opponent my long-haired opponent. Um, he gets a doctorate of divinity, which basically just like is sending away to get ordained as a minister. Literally anybody can do this, so he can start calling himself doctor. The incumbent sheriff, Carol Whitmire, a Democrat, responds by hiring an ATF agent to try and bust him for illegal weapons. He carries the Aspen vote, but ultimately loses the county overall because the Republican drops out. The Democrats and the Republicans collude to make sure that, like, okay, we're not gonna contest each other in this particular area as long as we can keep this guy out. Now, Oscar Acosta, a lawyer from LA who advised on Thompson's campaign, would go on to inspire the character of Dr. Gonzo in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. So he meets this person around that time. He meets Jan Wenner around this time, the founder and editor of Rolling Stone. He says he's impressed by their coverage of the riot at the Altamont Free Concert, where the Hells Angels attacked the crowd. Wenner invites him to write an article for Rolling Stone about the campaign, called The Battle of Aspen. Now, they eventually become friends. Wenner would end up compiling these interviews that make up the oral biography Gonzo. So he loses, but his protege, through whom he planned to operate, wins the next election. His name is Dick Keenast, and he orders the Aspen PD to not cooperate with federal agents on marijuana busts, to focus more on rehabilitation, community service. That we are led to believe was the policing culture for the next generation. Now, of course, keep the flip side of that in mind. The class character of the town. It's one of the most expensive cities for housing in the world. It's a world famous destination, vacation home for wealthy tourists. It's not the sort of place you would expect to be over policed in the first place.
Sure.
Like Jan Winter talks about having dinner in Aspen with the original financier of Intel. That's the sort of group that Thompson courted. Not that he was any less unhinged around those people, but that's whose notice he was trying to attract. So not long after, in June 1970, he writes a piece for Scanlan's Monthly called "The Kentucky Derby is Decadent and Depraved." Have you read that one?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah. This is the first article that really earns the label Gonzo journalism. Um,
It's good. It's a good article. It
yeah.
it it, it is. I understand why like this worked for people.
Oh, he's
100%.
he's very funny. He's very funny, and he captures the vibe of it. Certainly, he doesn't really report on the race. He reports on the partying culture around it. This also puts him in contact with Ralph Steadman. This article does, an English illustrator who would go on to collaborate with him for the rest of his life.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I read a few articles of his prior to this record. He's remarkably lucid and comprehensive, like when laying out the landscape of this or that political arena. Like also in The Great Shark Hunt, Louisville, a southern city with northern problems, which is about housing segregation. That could have been a subchapter in The Color of Law.
Hmm.
Like he's supposed to be a very, very good interviewer when he's on his game. Now, later in 1970, this is where the prelude for Fear and Loathing comes together. He meets back up with Acosta while researching a piece called "Strange Rumblings in Aztlan," which is about the big watershed moment in the Chicano rights movement, the murder of the journalist Ruben Salazar. It's a really strong piece on the racism, the brutality of the LAPD. Now they go to Vegas during this time because Acosta doesn't feel comfortable discussing the case in LA. Thompson at this time is on assignment by Sports Illustrated to write a 250 word photo caption about the Mint 400 motorcycle race. He turns in a piece over 10 times that length.
I respect the hell out of that. I'm sorry. I do love that. That's so stupid.
It's fantastic energy. It's obviously turned down, but Jan Winter at Rolling Stone likes it. He says, "Okay, I want to run this piece, but go back to Vegas and expand on it." So Thompson and Acosta go back to Vegas for a drug enforcement conference the following month. That part of the book is true, that there was a conference and they went to it. This becomes Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It's serialized in two parts in Rolling Stone starting in November of 71. Random House publishes the hardcover the following July.
Does
Thompson actually.
Rolling Stone like publish all of this, or is some of this that we read in the hardcover now like edited? Like it's just a lot of really risque shit for Rolling Stone.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to make of the text as published in Rolling Stone
I
versus
mean,
what we
Rolling
see
Stone
here.
will publish like some pretty raunchy stuff. It's not like they've never had the word fuck or whatever in their stuff. There's some wild shit in this book.
Oh
Is
yeah,
all that
yeah.
I'm thinking about.
We'll get into like as far as I'm aware, it's published more or less completely. I'm not aware of any bits
Sure.
that are added like ex post facto. this actually starts a really funny, like, good-natured feud between him and Wenner. Like, Thompson, for the rest of his life, is convinced that Wenner's got a warehouse full of hardcovers somewhere that he's just waiting to sell off as soon as he dies. But he's in good with Rolling Stone now. He's assigned to cover the 1972 election for them. This is Nixon versus George McGovern, right? The Democrat senator from South Dakota. He's paid $1,000 a month to do this. Now today
Mm,
that'd be more like 7,500 a month, so pretty handsomely.
very slick.
Yeah, from this beat, he writes Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72. And the context for this is interesting, right? The previous year, the 26th Amendment had just been passed. The voting age was lowered from 21 to 18. So suddenly a huge swath of Rolling Stone's readership can vote, right? So Wenner's like, we can reach the youth with this counterculture figure. And he's bigger than he knows at this time. Like everybody on the McGovern campaign is reading Rolling Stone like Hillary's people watch West Wing.
Yeah.
And this is where you kind of get we kind of return to the tenets of gonzo journalism, which is, he says something that I respect very much, which is that objectivity in journalism is a myth. Like
Hmm.
what you choose to cover and from what perspective, those are political choices. Gonzo takes it a step farther in not only rejecting journalistic, objectivity, but actually he participates in the events that he's reporting on and perhaps shapes them in some way or another. There's a rumor in Campaign Trail 72 that Democratic politician Edmund Muskie, who was running for president at one point, had this drug addiction that Hunter reported on. He himself started that rumor. It played a factor in him like losing the nomination.
Wow.
Now, fans of his work at Rolling Stone would send him joints or pills, and according to Wenner, he would usually take them. Many of these people likely also read his private newsletter, which by the 70s had a readership of about 1 million. So he's got
He
a
had
big
his
voice.
private newsletter, like what is it? Like his like they it was like direct mail or what?
As far as I'm aware, yeah, yeah, like
His Substack.
exactly. It's an old-timey Substack, and it's his musings on politics and whatnot. Now, a
Sure.
recurring theme, this is where we can get into a recurring theme in his life, his seemingly supernatural ability to function on drugs, booze, a frankly bizarre diet. Like, there is a daily routine of his floating around that's clearly intended to be satire, like wake up at 3, do like 5 lines of cocaine or whatever. Like, but truth is stranger than fiction. This was a guy who could put away a noontime breakfast of grapefruit and gin and 6 Heinekens.
Wow.
But it's not till 1973 that he tries cocaine for the first time.
Hmm.
That's where his productivity really starts to suffer.
So wait, he doesn't try cocaine until 2 years after he's actually published Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Hmm.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, no, like that he plays up a lot of this stuff. But that's where productivity really starts to suffer. He's assigned the following year to the Rumble in the Jungle, which is the boxing match between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali in Kinshasa in what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He misses the match because he's drugged up in his hotel room.
Wow.
This is somebody who's very, very high maintenance. Like at one point, there's 4 people on the Rolling Stone staff, according to Wenner, just dedicated to keeping Thompson functioning, enabling him really, because his wife says that he didn't start out this drug fiend, but he became that way really after Rolling Stone made him famous.
Hmm.
Ralph Steadman corroborates this. He says after the Rumble in the Jungle, it was like he left part of his personality behind and got into another. Now he's in Kinshasa. His wife goes to a therapist. Hunter doesn't believe in therapy, if you can believe that.
Shocker.
He Guys will literally go to Kinshasa and like do drugs in their hotel room instead of watching a boxing match instead of going to therapy. He tries to keep her from going. He doesn't succeed. Gradually, over the next 6 years, she gets off drugs. She gets off alcohol. She separates from him in 78, after which he throws her clothes out and sets them on fire.
Jesus.
Divorces his ass in 1980. She's on the upswing. He is not. This is funny. In 1974, Gary Trudeau introduces a new character into his political comic strip Doonesbury. One of the main characters has an Uncle Duke, who is literally just Thompson, right down to the Samoan sidekick during one arc. Now, Thompson calls Sandy Berger, this McGovern speechwriter who by this time is practicing law. He says he wants to sue Trudeau for defamation of character. He hangs up on her when she says he doesn't have a shot because truth is an absolute defense in defamation cases.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. Even with all this, there's talk of sending him to Ho Chi Minh City, what was then called Saigon, to cover the end of the Vietnam War. He's there at least until 10 days before the city is captured. Same deal as the Rumble in the Jungle. He never pulls a piece together, despite going to the front for a day.
Well,
Like,
that's because he was leading the resistance forces. He took so much
We
cocaine. We can only imagine that he, wanting the left to succeed so much, like he says, uh strapped up and made it happen. You know that helicopter is pulling away. What you don't see is he is actually shooting at that last helicopter out of Saigon.
Oh yeah, yeah, surely, and not making elderly Vietnamese bellhops fetch him ice.
Surely not.
Like for a guy who is anti-war, and very publicly so, what a colossal waste to go to the front line of U.S. imperialism and
Of like
just
the active collapse of like the main front of US imperialism at that time, right? Like
mm,
you are watching the victory of this shit that you said you were mourning in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Like, no, it's real, it's here. You said you could see the high water mark and you miss it. This is the wave crushing the dam, right? And you are spending, because I read a little bit about this, and you're spending your time blasted abusing the hotel staff, the Vietnamese hotel staff.
yeah, it's extremely disappointing because again, he's a strong writer, but like
Oh yeah, he's brilliant.
yeah, but this is where he really starts going downhill. He bops around a while in Hawaii with his new girlfriend Layla Nabulsi from SNL. He phones in a book about it called The Curse of Lono. Doesn't do well, savaged by critics. It's a cycle, it seems to me, Jacob. Like, because he says, okay, well, this is the end of the counterculture and like anti-war movement. It failed. Why did this happen in Fear and Loathing? But then he gets really enamored with Jimmy Carter,
Sure.
in the same way that he believed like George McGovern was a very decent guy. And McGovern did run on a platform of universal basic income ending the Vietnam War, but like he was hobbled by his own party for it. Like, he doesn't really break with ruling class politics fully. At least not until the very, very end of his life and kind of privately. He gets convinced to go into rehab in 1982 that lasts a week.
Yeah, because he
Citing
was cured.
yeah. Yeah, no. He left it all behind. There was a Vegas adaptation of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas that same year, 1982, in the West End. By this time, he's already sold the film rights in perpetuity for $25,000. Um, Nabulsi ended up renegotiating the deal, so they went back to him eventually. Big, big bro move by her. And he's got royalties from his books. He's making money from the odd article. Like he would publish 17 articles for Rolling Stone from 1984 to 2004. And from 1985 to 1990, he would be a weekly columnist for the San Francisco Examiner. He's also giving lectures at clubs and colleges, many of which he shows up late to, but he ends up getting paid outsized amounts for, if he shows at all. Sometimes he would cancel like 4 hours in advance. The best money he made was $15,000 to $20,000 per appearance. One estimate puts a good lecture year in at like 200,000.
Good God.
But in general, if he's in arrears with the IRS, like he can get one of his wealthy patrons to bail him out. He's also got assistants. He likes young women assistants who can type for him and keep him on task. And oh yeah, bang him.
Yeah.
Jack Nicholson was a friend of his. He described the migration from assistant to GF as like fairly consistent behavior. He would have Rolling Stone announce when he was looking for an assistant too. Like connections of his would procure them, but like of course people would also just write in to volunteer. He never liked to use computers. He would generally write notes by hand, type a page, correct it by hand, and that's what he needed an assistant for. Like not only to keep him drugged up, but also to keep him on task.
I need that for my posts. I need somebody doing that role for my posts.
And like that's the thing.
Write into the socialistshelf@gmail.com if you want to be my post scribe.
If Thompson was on Blue Sky, like he would put out a post like there would be like a day where he was just like posting constantly. There would be droughts. There would be posts that he spent like a full day or two like contemplating. Because that's the thing. Like when he was like, you know, when he was like, writing seriously and not just like tearing like notes out of his notebook and like assembling them later, as happened with Kentucky Derby, right? He was very, very deliberate about the language that he used in his turns of phrase. Like, and it shows. Now, he starts traveling in the last decade of his life, doing his research with the news and long phone conversations. About the time of the 25th anniversary of the Vegas book, as he calls it, he befriends Johnny Depp, who is enamored with him. He writes the intro to Gonzo. Hunter eventually offers him the role of Raoul Duke, who is his like alternate persona from whose perspective Fear of Loathing is. The movie drops in 98, mixed reviews, shot on a budget of $18.5 million, makes back about two-thirds of that. His very last job is an online sports column at ESPN. a former managing editor of Rolling Stone who works at ESPN, gets him this job. It's a shorter form and it fits him because he's in a pretty hardcore decline. You can really see it in his interview with Conan O'Brien in '03. You read his stuff from the ESPN era, and it's funny, but it's also just rambling in a way that's far less cohesive than his earlier work.
Hmm.
Sometime around then, he meets Anita Baymuk, who's dating a friend of his. He makes her his assistant, then his GF, then his wife in 2003. His piece on 9/11 is cited by many as like real prescient. Like he calls that like, yeah, this we're entering a period of just like indefinite war. And that's what he ultimately that's the period he ultimately ends in, you know. The United States is, you know, as much as he believed the death of the American dream came with like the Nixon era and all, like this is like he says straight up that yeah, you know, if Nixon were running against Bush, like I would happily vote for Nixon. He supported Kerry in '04. He was disillusioned for the last time when Bush rigged his second election in a row and won. Then the following year, he slips while on vacation, breaks his leg. So yeah, he's watching the systematic dismemberment of the rights won by the various liberation struggles of his youth. He himself is also breaking down. So he decides to kill himself ultimately. 220
Yeah.
2005, he shoots himself in the head in his home while his son, his daughter-in-law, and his grandson are visiting. His wife, Anita, is actually on the phone with him as he does this. They're in the other room at the time. At first, Juan thinks it's a book falling down. He's cremated. His funeral is exactly 6 months later. It's paid for by Johnny Depp. His ashes are shot out of a cannon on his property. Yeah, he's survived by his wives, his son, his grandson. Like he's he's somebody who to the end resisted any sort of restraints, you know, by authority, by, you know, rules about human conduct, um, and ultimately by his own body. You know, complicated dude who like again, you read Fear and Loathing and you get kind of angry, you know, because you know, not only Fear and Loathing, but his political work, like in Great Shark Hunt, right? This is somebody who asked a lot of good questions, who had some genuine insights, and you know, ultimately pissed it away. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah. I also think, obviously you gave a full bio of Thompson there, and our focus here is Fear and Loathing. But one thing that's worth noting is like one, Fear and Loathing is not a book that's particularly plot heavy. So, we have some time for that bio. But secondly, Fear and Loathing, despite it happening, before his full cocaine addiction, before his, full decline, it represents this moment in his career where, he's already absolutely a chaotic guy, functioning alcoholic, all of that, barely functioning alcoholic. Um, and it represents this moment where like you can tell it's not even just like a bit like he sees the own trajectory of his life, right? Like the characters in this book are obviously not as bad as he was at that time. He was not on every drug in existence while he's writing this book. He was drugged up, not quite this bad, but sees the trajectory he's on, the path he's on, like as a person. Um, and this book is him sort of just watching that and kind of embracing that as an inevitability. It's not him rubber stamping it. There are
Right.
definitely people who are like, yeah, no, yeah, he's so cool and based. There's like a Hunter S. Thompson quote from the early 2000s of when he heard people were using quotes from Fear and Loathing for their like aim away messages. Like stoners, which is pretty funny that he was like mad about that because he was like, no one should like live like me or whatever.
Well, he
But
said that like, you know, I've never recommended drugs and alcohol to anybody else, but they have always worked for me.
yeah, which is funny, but he is obviously not signing off on that. Like he is not so much rubber stamping it. He's not saying this is good. He's not saying the characters in this book are justified. But what he
Mhm.
is saying is this is how it fucking is, right? This is how it is for him. This is how it is for our society. This is locked in. This is America, such as it exists. And maybe there's some good beyond it. But for me and my house, this is just what society is now, with just genuinely no vision of anything beyond or outside of it. And of course, this is a work of semi-journalism, gonzo journalism. He calls it failed gonzo journalism because he does actually edit this book. Um, but it is also at the same time like it is sort of a rejection of sort of possibility in a very interesting way. And as such, it's this just bleak romp that is a wild ride to read and very well written, but makes you feel really bad. At least it makes me feel really bad.
It's there is a certain surrender to the momentum of it all. Like one of my favorite bits here is from the very first page. Like, the only thing that really worried me was the ether. There's nothing in the world more helpless and irresponsible and depraved than a man in the depths of an ether binge. And I knew we'd get into that rotten stuff pretty soon.
Yeah, he's aware. Like from
Mm,
the beginning, he's like, yeah, that shit sucks. So worried about the fact that I'm about to huff it, you know?
hmm hmm Yeah, no. Um,
Also, I want to be clear that I'm not saying that he's not aware that these characters are like bad. Like I don't want to imply that like he is making the case that everything that happens in here is normal and good.
right.
I just think that he's not, doing look at the depravity of America and what we shouldn't be. I think it's that to a degree, but I also think it's like, well, I think he's giving up a little bit. I think he's walking, and it's worth noting that it's right after this book that he really starts his own full scale decline.
It is a
You
very
know?
pessimistic text. Yeah. Yeah, no, like it's the because he's here and like he's surrounded by people who are either just drowning themselves in the absolute opulence of Vegas, or the people who are, tasked with enforcing with enforcing the property relations that govern it. You know, and to the extent that he has any insight about how it works, it's buried under and filtered through his intoxicated haze.
And
And
the broad story here is just this main guy that is his stand-in character, which is Dr. Raoul Duke, along with his attorney, Dr. Gonzo, on their way to Las Vegas to write about this motocross event. And they are on their way, and they've already, at the top of the novel, spent all the money that they're going to make on this piece plus more um to gracious on like drugs and like renting this fancy car, and they're charging cards that have nothing to them and all this stuff, and it's him as his doctor of journalism and his lawyer who has the running bit that like, as your lawyer, I'd advise you to do
I
more meth or whatever.
love that.
And no, it's quite funny. And he is, and from the beginning, they're just tearing down this highway. Um, and they pick up this hitchhiker who they sort of, you immediately see is terrified of them. And you just have this moment. They're riding along in the Great Red Shark, this red convertible. And it says, maybe I'd better have a chat with this boy, I thought. Perhaps if I explain things, he'll rest easy. Of course, I leaned around in the seat and gave him a big fine smile, admiring the shape of his skull. By the way, I said, there's one thing you should probably understand. He stared at me, not blinking. Was he gritting his teeth? Can you hear me? I yelled. He nodded. That's good, I said, because I want you to know that we're on our way to Las Vegas to find the American dream. I smiled. That's why we rented this car. It was the only way to do it. Can you grasp that? And then he immediately offers him a beer. Um, and right from the bat, these two characters are chasing after the American dream, and it always capitalizes it, AD, American dream.
Yeah, this is what he says at first, right? Of course, they're on assignment. That's why they're going there. But like he does through over the course of the text start believing his own story, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, that does become the quest that he's on. And of course that'll go where it goes. We'll get into that. But like right off the bat, the course of doing this is just drowning yourself in consumption, right? Very conspicuous consumption and total hedonism. And it's
And you have throughout this too, a bunch of little illustrations of just like weird, freaky little guys. You have
yeah,
that in
this
your
is Ralph
copy?
Steadman.
Yeah, Ralph Steadman. All these just like it's just like different illustrations of scenes from the novel that are just, warped as if by a drug trip. And I do like the art in this quite a lot.
Mm,
It's it works quite well with it. And then you immediately have, them just a few pages later stopping, getting some gas. They're on their way to Vegas. They're complaining about the kid. Um, and they're complaining about the guy. And then they're complaining about the guy at the gas station who's asking them to not just like ram over gas pumps and destroy everything. And they're complaining. There's another worrier, said my attorney. He's probably all cranked up on speed. Yeah, you should have given him some reds. Reds wouldn't help a pig like that, he said. To hell with them. We have a lot of business to take care of before we can get on the road. Um, and I note this because this is a recurring thing. They use the term pigs a lot to
mm,
describe people they don't like, the man in quotations, right? Anybody who is in their way. Not really very often to describe the literal police they interact with, though they do a couple times. But like to describe like janitors and stuff and like clerks and like just people who are telling them to behave themselves. Um, and it's a very interesting counterculture thing that Thompson's bringing in intentionally here. Again, Thompson's like aware of what he's communicating here. He's not a dupe to this whole process.
mm.
Uh, these guys who come out of the counterculture, we don't know their background, but they know about SDS, they know about the anti-war movement, they were there in some capacity, um, are using this radical language of the 60s and early 70s, calling people pigs and stuff, fight the power, etc., and using it on anyone who asks them to have any modicum of personal responsibility.
Right.
They're not using it against the capitalist class. They're not using it against the owners of these casinos. They're not using it to describe, maybe the police officers who directly stand in their personal way, but to describe, the police, the way the Black Panthers would use it, they are using it to describe any inhibition on their personal consumption, which is a great commentary and reflection of where the US left, the hyper individualist elements of the US left, largely like large segments of like the sort of what became the hippies, the sort of white anti-war movement, the sort of more unprincipled, the more some of
Mhm.
them anarchistic, some of them they would call themselves all kinds of things, but people without structure, without real ideology beyond a rebellion against authority, once they had nowhere to go, nowhere to fight, once these structures of quote old and evil remained a little more resilient than them after they got certain concessions, they became rebels against anything that inhibited their own personal consumption, which in a lot of ways is like the story of the like boomers and Gen X, you know, the
Yeah.
radical wings.
Yeah, there's a couple of components to this constant rage against any kind of check on their consumption and their rampage, right? There is, as you say, the projection, right? That guy's a paranoid psychotic anyway. This is somebody who's this is somebody who he's trying to rent a car from, right? That guy's a paranoid psychotic. This guy's a Nazi. These people here are insane. Whether he's on a drug trip and thinks he's surrounded by lizards, or whether it's just like somebody who's trying to get him to slow down, like he he's adamant that he can spot corruption and abuse of power in anybody around him. There's
And
that, and there's also it's just combined with like with Thompson's general penchant for using political language in a pejorative fashion without really respect to without really respect to specific meanings of these words. Like he'll call people Nazis, he'll call people fascists, this, that, or the other,
and
and it's
communists
all
also
yeah,
is pejorative. He's
yes.
throwing out all the words.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's much less analysis in that and much more vibes.
Absolutely. And I mean, like, speaking of vibes, like you have in this next chapter, which by the way, all the chapter titles quite good. Things like chapter 3, A Strange Medicine on the Desert, A Crisis of Confidence. When this comes out, we will have already released our Percy Jackson episode. Let's call this an adult version of the Percy Jackson titles.
That's
Um,
true. That's true. Because when Percy Jackson is going to L.A., he actually drives right past Gonzo and Duke.
exactly right. Um, we have like a quote here. How often does a chance like this come around? To jangle the old bastards right down to the core of their spleens. Old elephants limp off to the hills to die. old Americans go out to the highways and drive themselves to death with huge cars. And like I wrote, subtle. Like I said, it's obviously it's lacking in all pretense. It's very clear just the hyper consumptive, insane nature of these characters, both, literally and what they represent.
Well, and he goes on to say, he comes right out and says it. Our trip was different. It was a classic affirmation of everything right and true and
Yeah.
decent in the national character. Gross physical salute to the fantastic possibilities of life in this country, but only for those with true grit. And we were chock full of that. Like, yeah, that and a few other things. Um, so they get to the have they gotten to the hotel by this time? Yeah, they have.
They're closing in on it, yeah. The
Yeah.
first hotel that they ruin.
Yeah, God. And again, this is straight out of Thompson. He was known for like racking up like insane, exorbitant um
Like hotel deaths and stuff like that.
yeah. Room service. That's the word I was looking for. Good
Hmm.
God. But as little attention as he pays to his budget, and the numbers and like that sort of thing, like there are bits where he delves into like the mechanics of stuff, right? Where he's faking like he's got a motorcycle at one point, a Vincent Black Shadow, and he
Yeah,
describes
they
it as
reference that a lot.
yeah. The new model's something like 2,000 cubic inches, developing 200 brake horsepower at 4,000 revolutions per minute on a magnesium frame with two styrofoam seats and a total curb weight of exactly 200 pounds. Again, like when he gets locked in on these aspects of consumption, of success, of being able to when he gets locked in on these aspects of the fulfillment of the American dream, consumption, success, like looking and sounding impressive, like this is where he really gets specific.
Sure, he'll yada yada away like whole nights, and then he'll get in like fixated on a car and immediately be like, "I want an official Red Ryder carbine action 200 shot range model air." Like he gets very like that like the kid fixated on the toy, like very like Chris. Like I read that almost like in the breathless Ralphie voice from Christmas Story, like just like yelling about his Red Ryder BB gun. You know what I
It
mean?
is, it
Um,
is, and
and
it's and it,
he does that too with like later on, like talking about blowing up his car tires bigger and bigger and getting very
mhm.
specific about like what like car the air on the car tires correlates to like how fast he can turn the car and the guy at the station. Like it's crazy how specific he gets at this. And then other times it will literally be like, and we crossed the city, like he can throw stuff away very, very fast. And which is interesting. And I think a lot of that is he is good at writing these characters that are high the entire time on any number of substances. And that is the nature, right? Of like when you're on any drug, but obviously a number of drugs, especially, is you can have these moments where time is super fast, time is super slow, you hyperfixate, you talk a lot, then you turn into just a slug for an hour. Like it can do that. And so too does the narrative.
And it's against this backdrop of horror and violence
Oh
and
yeah, it's terrifying.
imperialism. Like in early in chapter 4 when he's getting to the motorcycle race, right? The TV news was about the Laos invasion, a series of horrifying disasters, explosions and twisted wreckage, men fleeing in terror, Pentagon generals babbling insane lies. Turn that shit off, screamed my attorney. Let's get out of here. You skip a little bit here. They turn up the radio. What's playing? The battle hymn of Lieutenant Calley. Lieutenant Calley, of course, being one of the key figures in the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, right? On TV, on the radio, like all around them, there's this dull haze of violence that we're inundated with and yet unable to do anything about.
Or like take in mind like a little earlier than that when he's like looking back through his notes and talking about like when he went and visited some prisoners and then he wrote this big note that said kill the body and the head will die and then it says quote him talking and once again he has this like kind of lucid moment about current events. It says this line appears in my notebook for some reason. Perhaps some connection with Joe Frazier. Is he still alive? Still able to talk? I watched that fight in Seattle. Horribly twisted, about 4 seats down the aisle from the governor. A very painful experience in every way, a proper end to the 60s. Tim Leary, a prisoner of Eldridge Cleaver in Algeria. Bob Dylan clipping coupons in Greenwich Village. both Kennedys murdered by mutants, Owlsley folding napkins on Terminal Island, and finally, Cassius slash Ali belted incredibly off his pedestal by a human hamburger, a man on the verge of death. Joe Frazier, like Nixon, had finally prevailed for reasons that people like me refuse to understand, at least not out loud. But that was some other era, burned out and long gone from the brutish realities of this foul year of our Lord, 1971. And I find that interesting, like going alongside, referring to, the defeat of Muhammad Ali, referring to, these different moments that marked the end of the 60s, the early 70s, obviously his own sort of weird, twisted version of it, as we can see, referring to people as human hamburgers and mutants and stuff like that. But it is an interesting context of this guy that like was, you know, obviously this is a stand-in for Thompson, but if we're imagining a backstory for this character, this guy that was in some sense ingrained in the left, whatever it was, that he had stakes with supporting Muhammad Ali, right? That he knew about, Leary and Cleaver and all this different stuff. And I also find it very interesting though that this book, and maybe this is too early to throw this out, but I'm going to go ahead and say it because I'm thinking about it the entire time, that this book in a lot of ways is Thompson's postmortem of the like 60s left, right?
Hmm.
And like really not just the left, but the possibility of overcoming the US system, whatever that is, capital S, that he doesn't have a great analysis of, but he sees it's there. And this is 1971, right? Like by our standards today, this thing was still very live in 1971. The trends of the 60s, the radicalism, yes, Nixon had been elected, but like the Black Panthers are heavily kicking at this time. Like there's a lot of real potentiality and possibility and radical action happening. And Thompson is in a privileged enough position as a guy that he can see, okay, my like groups I ran with, things went poorly for them. So we're going on ahead and like hanging up the towel. We're done. The fight's over. And I'm really pissed off because like George Jackson was still alive when he wrote this book. Like, you know
Right.
what I mean? Like this shit's still happening. It's true. He was right. Like this movement did die in a lot of ways. I mean, it was crushed, but like it pisses me off that he wrote this in 1971. That really makes me mad. And it like
Well,
I would respect it more if this book came out in 1985, to be honest.
Well, and in 1971 when he writes this, why is he in Vegas in the first place? It's because he and, Oscar Acosta are escaping LA to discuss the killing of Ruben Salazar, right? The journalist by the LAPD, right? A year and a half prior to that, you have the assassination of Fred Hampton by Illinois PD and the FBI. There are genuine, the figures that he puts in here, I mean, there's the Kennedys, of course, but like it's a very depoliticized sort of run through like big names
Yeah.
and like big moments that he kind of distills the end of this era and the beginning of the next one
Yeah.
to,
We didn't
without
start the fire, ass. Yeah,
yeah,
summary.
without putting him in the larger context of the movements that are, you know, that are very real. And if you just read Fear and Loathing, you would assume that, he didn't know anything else about, about what was going on. But he did.
I,
He
I
wrote
can't
Strange
help.
Rumblings in Aztlan. He just, doesn't see fit to mention it here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can't
Mhm.
help but like, I mentioned George Jackson. I can't help but think, you know, Thompson is a guy that not too long before the same thing happened to George Jackson, he gets in trouble for like doing what was it, a minor robbery or
Mhm.
whatever? When he was like in high school, he spends some days in prison, what or in jail or whatever. Uh, you know, whole thing happens. A very similar crime, only a few years later, gets committed by George Jackson as a 17-year-old, around the same age he
Yes.
was.
Yes.
George Jackson spends the rest of his life in prison. And what does George Jackson do with the time he's got and whatever? And it just, this book comes out like a month after George Jackson is murdered. He's writing it the day before, or not the day before, but the months before George Jackson is killed, while like this prison movement is like hot. Like there was like the upri like there's the Soledad Brothers uprisings and shit are
Hmm.
happening, right? And it's like hard for me, like I'm just imagining because this is also happening in California, right? Just not that far away, all things considered. it's hard for me to like picture like this guy who is, obviously he's not bourgeoisie, but he's relatively privileged as like a white guy and a guy who's been able to skate by and who has for things that have ruined other people's lives been able to get away with over and over and over and behave irresponsibly. And this guy, despite all of that, just gets to write and become a millionaire off of his book about nihilism. And that's
Hmm.
really frustrating to me, even though the
Here's
book is really fucking good, to be
here's
clear.
my hot take. I wonder if J.D. Vance has read Hunter S. Thompson and
That's
what
an
he
interesting
thinks of
question.
Thompson, because I think Thompson's exactly the sort of person that J.D. Vance would like. Maybe not in his conduct, certainly, maybe not in his
Sure.
proximity to the various political strains that he has. But like, Vance says straight up in Hillbilly Elegy that, yeah, I want society to enable the people who are on the fringes of wealth and success to achieve it. Thompson was this grinder who charisma checked his way through life, who constantly spent time in the company of those with more power than he, who curried their favor. He couldn't do anything productive with himself but write. And in a certain sense, there's very little difference between relentlessly abusing your body to be a Yale Law VC pervert or relentlessly abusing your body to be a gonzo journalist who writes, off the wall articles about such people, right?
I mean,
Once.
go read
Mhm.
Antonio Gramsci talking about why certain elements of the anarchist movement were able to become effective fascists when they got a little older and richer. And again, that's not a shot at all anarchists, but I'm making a point of like this undisciplined, privileged realm of leftism that this sort of left anarchistic tendency of the 60s, right? I'm talking about college students. I'm talking about SDS, all of this stuff. Not bad people, a lot of them remarkable. We talked to Jonathan Melrod. I'm being, just to be very clear, I respect these people, but there's a reason a certain layer of these people, the most privileged of them, and honestly, and like people like Thompson's case, the most lucky of them, because he got lucky repeatedly, were able to then become comfortably integrated as an interesting bauble on the dashboard of the capitalist class in the next few decades.
That's a good way of putting it. My note here says, the ruling class loves their court jesters, right?
Yes.
A Thompson doesn't exist without a Nixon, and once you get into that mode, there's a lot that they will tolerate from you.
Exactly, bro. Like you're like bro is a Funko Pop like yelling at like Henry Kissinger or someone like that, right? Like bro
Mhm.
is a Funko Pop on like their shelf. Like that's like what he is. I like that we both kind of like had that connection. You said court jester. That's actually a better version. But you get what I'm saying. It's like yeah, and not to be
And I mean,
like too sorry, go ahead.
well, and he's still in search of like the one good Democrat, right? I mean, fucking
Yes.
John Kerry comes to his funeral. Like this is actually pretty funny. Like he describes, or his friends describe at one point him meeting like Bill Clinton, and like trying to trying to be like to interrogate and like confront him, and Clinton is like the one Democratic presidential candidate who can like keep up with him and just like shut him down.
Interesting. Hmm. Well, Clinton,
Smooth
not
operator,
anymore,
that
but he
guy.
certainly was a smooth operator.
Hmm.
If you see him recently, not so much. Um, you know, Probably because he's putting all of his energy into the third president is missing book. What happens next, Lenore, in this plot?
So like he doesn't really see the race, I'll say that. Like
No.
there's a big like cloud of dust, and so everybody just kind of has to infer what's going on. They have to
Now this is
infer.
pod racing.
Yeah, exactly. They have to infer that, this is the race is even taking place. Like the
Sebulba wins, though. That is important. That Sebulba does win the race.
Oh yeah, yeah, justice for Sebulba. Yep.
Justice for Bondo Reams.
Yeah, and
Deep
this
cut.
there wait, who's Bondo Reams?
Okay.
Is he one of the pod racers?
He's a glub shitto. He's a glub shitto for sure.
Oh, he's a
Yeah.
Ben Quadinaros, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Penguanaros, Guando Ridge. Yeah, like do you think the Max Rebo bland will be playing at Dexter Jetster's diner the
Hmm.
upcoming, yeah.
Playing that sweet, sweet jizz music.
Yeah, hanging out with Peter Igloo, 100%.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and again, like he's here at the race. The guy from Life is just down at the next table. Like the racers are still asleep. The dust is on the desert. $50,000 in prize money slumbers darkly in the office safe at Del Webb's famous Fabulous Mint Hotel in the bright heart of Casino Center. Extreme tension, and our life team is here, as always, with a sturdy police escort. Yes, operator, that word was police. What else? This is, after all, a life special. And again, it prefigures, I think, the real decline of bourgeois journalism that we're seeing now. There's less and less money to send correspondents out to these things. You can get by now just like cribbing from news wires and fluffing it up with your own personality. Like, he's make this person here is essentially doing something similar to him and trying to make it sound much more dangerous than, covering the race actually is.
Exactly
Um,
right.
because
And I think it really like after this section about covering the race right here, where he, doesn't cover the race, he basically you can just like even forget about that. Like he
mm,
doesn't talk about it again. He like one time says, "Oh yeah, I'm supposed to send an article to Sports Illustrated," and doesn't. It is left behind. In fact, I had kind of forgotten what happens and like later on in the book, and I was trying to remember when I reread this. I was like, "Why does he stay in Las Vegas again?" And it's because of the drug convention later on because he gets forced back. But you then have a period right after this race where he is like steeped to his ears in Vegas. And this is the point where they really, like one of two times in the novel, where they get into what Vegas is like versus,
mm.
what America is like, and like the sort of particularity of this town. Um, and he's just absolutely destroyed on ether, trying to get into casinos, right? And he's going around saying, just like literally just yapping, trying to get into circus, saying, "Dogs, fuck the Pope, no fault of mine. Why money? My name is Greeks, women and children to armored car, orders from Captain Zeeps." Like literally like just yapping. And then it says, "Ether is the perfect drug for Las Vegas. In this town, they love a drunk, fresh meat. So they put us through the turnstiles and turned us loose inside. The circus is what the whole world would be doing on Saturday night if the Nazis had won the war. This is the Sixth Reich. The ground floor is full of gambling tables like all the other casinos, but this place is about 4 stories high in the style of a circus tent." And, it goes really at length about all the crazy shows that are going on. And like, there's like, I think it says at one point, there's like a dwarf that's being crucified, and there's like
Mm.
dancing nympho sisters, and no one's paying attention to it because they're like hooked on the money. Um,
The movie is there's a very giallo cast to the filming of this movie, all like, harsh colored lights and
sure.
lurid surroundings. Like it's exactly the right way to film this sort of thing.
I have a question.
Hmm.
What is what happened to the Fourth and Fifth Reich?
That's so I actually do have a take on this,
I was
right?
curious if you did.
Because like, people describe sometimes like the United States as the Fourth Reich, or they speculate on what comes after,
Sure.
global fascism. We've already seen like, regional fascism in the form of, Nazi Germany, right? Um, I think the Sixth Reich is like, okay, like, not only do you have fascism, not only do you have the defeat of the ability of the working class to organize itself and fight for its betterment, but you've lost track of history itself, right? You've skipped two entire Reichs, and like this course of history through which 4 and 5 have unfolded is just completely foreign, completely divorced from any analysis. Every so often you just wake up and look around and see, oh yeah, we're in Reich number 6 now. You
Will
know,
I go to hell if I call this episode "Dude, Where's My Reich"?
oh no, no,
Just
you'll go to a really cool hell.
okay, cool. Because it's that's what it is. And that's kind of how I read it as well. I don't know if he actually had that level of analysis or if he was just writing what a drugged guy would say and stumbled into this. It
Well,
doesn't really matter. But
there
like
is. Well, sorry to cut you off.
yeah, no, I'm just saying there is an element of like, dude, dudes, where's my car? We had a crazy night last night. Dude, where's my country? Like we smoked so much weed, we didn't actually fight the cops. We just thought our victory was inevitable, that kind of shit.
And that's the thing, right? We just thought our victory was inevitable, right? Because there's not really a sense of the masses other than this like amorphous blob of like gamblers and dope fiends and
No, they hate
asshole
they hate
cops.
workers. They
Oh yeah.
fucking hate workers.
Oh yeah, no, they abuse these people constantly. They're like, they'll just like like drive up onto the sidewalk and tell the valet, yeah, put this car somewhere. Right.
No, they describe the workers as pigs more than anyone else because the workers are like, could you please not like vomit in the buffet, sir?
Yeah. They'll be like,
And,
oh, like, there were like 200 of us and we had an ugly mood and we were in kind of an ugly mood. So they opened the bar early, like in Vegas, they love a drunk because like they can take advantage of him. Like a little later on, halfway through the book, he's like, in Las Vegas, they kill the weak and deranged, but like they love a drunk though, right? Because they can do whatever they want with him. And that's what really scares Thompson at the end of the day is being in that class of non-persons, right? Like
yeah,
even when he's writing like Strange Rumblings in Aztlan and saying very intelligent and true things about the incompetence and the graft um, of the LAPD, right? Even at that moment, he's like, okay, well, but I'm hesitant to believe that I mean he does come down the side of Salazar and the Chicano movement and all that, but like his process of getting there is like, well, it's hard for me to believe that it's like a targeted killing because if the police are targeting journalists, then everything's off the table. Anything can happen, you know? And it's like,
it's
dude, like this
wild
has
to
already been
in
the
nine.
case.
Yeah, it's wild in the 19 like 70s to be like the cops would kill journalists.
Like we
Like
we
I understand they didn't have access to all the information we have about that era, but come on.
mm,
I mean, dude had been to Latin America and had seen American imperialism operate there.
oh
But
yeah.
it is what it is. But I think it's also interesting, and I think this is an intentional decision from Thompson. Because I don't want to because it's clear to listeners my feelings that I don't like this guy personally.
Mm.
But I want to like give him his due here. That I don't think when he's describing the city as a trap this character and all that stuff, he's not aware that there are people profiting off of it. It is interesting though that the character seems to have no real conception of there being a profit motive. Like he sort of sees the buildings themselves almost as leeches. Again, that's not Thompson's failure. That is Thompson writing a character here. And it is hard to divine what he
But
believes and doesn't.
but
But it
but
is
very yeah.
interesting.
But very, yeah, and very consciously writing a character who is immersed in this thing that he shouldn't be immersed in, but that he can't escape from, right?
Right.
Early on, when they pick up the hitchhiker in the film, by the way, is played by Tobey Maguire. It's super fucking funny.
Really,
Yeah.
really. I
Um,
gotta watch this movie. I just haven't seen it.
it's pretty fun. It's pretty fun. But like early on, Dr. Gonzo's freaking out, and Thompson's like, oh yeah, Duke is like, yeah, he's got a bad heart, angina pectoris. You skip ahead to like page 40. On the outskirts of Vegas, I stopped at a neighborhood pharmacy and bought 2 quarts of gold tequila, 2 fifths of Chivas Regal, and a pint of ether. I was
We used
tempted
to
to,
be a proper country.
right? I was tempted to ask for some Amyls. My angina pectoris was starting to act up. So this is somebody who's like just casually, he's not even telling people this. This is just in the prose. He's getting immersed in his own lies and, acting accordingly, right? Skip a
Mm.
bit. I wonder what he would say if I asked him for $22 worth of Romalar and a tank of nitrous oxide. Probably he would have sold it to me. Why not? Free enterprise. Give the public what it needs, especially this bad, sweaty, nervous talking fellow with tape all over his legs and this terrible cough, along with angina pectoris and these god awful aneurystic flashes every time he gets in the sun. I mean, this fellow's in bad shape, officer. How the hell was I to know he'd walk straight out to his car and start abusing those drugs? Like he has a sense that, okay, like and he actually, in a letter to a friend, described Free Enterprise as like straight up evil. Like,
Mhm.
he had vague leanings of, yeah, like this paradigm where people can pursue profit regardless of the detrimental effects to society, is wrong. But he, again, he doesn't feel like he has a way out of it because his theory of change has already been defeated. His heroes have already lost an election to Nixon.
So at this point, it all comes apart for them, and he has to flee the hotel so he doesn't have to pay for it because he has long spent all the money he has and is now just charging credit cards that he knows will be declined, but based on like since this is the 1970s, it's not like completely automatic through the internet, so you can get away with a little credit card fraud if you're good at it. Um, again, those were the days. But he flees town with a car full of drugs. And because and a police officer sort of catches him, and this part is a little unclear to me. Lenore, can you explain to me why does this police officer not like arrest him? Because the police officer's like, yeah, you got to take a rest. Um, and then he's like, well, the police officer's going to be waiting for me further down the road. So is that his paranoia or did I miss something?
I mean, there's a thing. Like he's talking to the cop, right? Before the cop catches him, he gives this whole rundown of, oh yeah, like if you're dealing with a police officer, you got to make him respect you, like by leading him a chase, and then like looking cool, right? Um,
That part is funny, yeah.
it is pretty funny, yeah. But like he knows he's fucked the minute that the policeman sees the beer in his hand, and he's like trying to come up with a good lie, and he's like, "Would they buy this? No, they would lock me in some hellhole of a jail and beat me on the kidneys with big branches, causing me to piss blood for years to come." And like, yes, horrible things happen in American jails, but like to Thompson, it feels like this is something that happens to other people, right? He knows this, it's a force of nature, and he's just trying to avoid it. A.
Hmm.
Um, but B, like it's remarkable to me that like he gets into the car, he says, this is his words, feeling raped. Once the policeman has said, look, like just go down like 2 miles to the nearest rest stop. Can you make it? The policeman lets him off very, very easy. And for some reason, like coming under the eye of the law and doing something very obviously illegal and dangerous, drunk driving, um, and getting let off is to this Raul Duke character, it just feels so viscerally it just feels so viscerally awful to him.
Well, he
Um,
wants to conquer, right? Like he wants to
exactly.
win this interaction, and he doesn't. He still gets what he wants, but he doesn't like win the battle of like I don't know
Yeah,
ideas, whatever it's supposed to be.
there's a line in the film where the police officer, played by Gary Busey, ends this interaction with like, "Can I have a kiss?" I think that kind of muddies what he's saying here. It's not just that, oh, like the officer is like like puncturing his masculinity or whatever. This is just like his relationship to authority is like, I should be able to do this and go unnoticed.
So he zips back to town because he's convinced if he tries to go any further, this cop is going to run him down. True or not, we're not sure. Dude is paranoid on a lot of drugs. He goes back to town. He goes to another hotel, the Flamingo. He links back up with his lawyer, Dr. Gonzo. And at this point, they are going to go to a hotel or hotel. At this point, they are going to go to a drug convention, a convention of district attorneys and police officers and sheriffs who are talking about how to defeat drug culture. And he's going to write a report on it. And this is a really bleak part of the book because his lawyer has a young woman with him
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
hotel room.
Before we go to the drug convention, let's traffic a teenage girl.
Yeah, and she draws pictures of who is it?
Barbara Streisand.
Barbara Streisand, this teenage girl who was like sheltered and from some kind of like hyper religious group that she'd run away from. Unclear how old she is, but like if she's 18, she's just barely 18.
She's played by
Um,
Christina Ricci in the film, if that tells you
gotcha.
anything.
She is like obsessively doing pictures of Barbara Streisand, like charcoal paint pencil, all types, and she's like surrounded by them. Uh, she is on acid that has been given to her by Gonzo, which like it turns out she had never even tasted alcohol before, he said. So she's just like completely destroyed. It's implied that they had sex. It's not quite clear exactly what happened, but it's obviously, you know, he gave a teenager acid and had sex with her, a woman that has never done drugs before. That's rape, no doubt, though he doesn't see it that way. And then our main character says like some of the most horrific shit ever. Like, and obviously he is like completely blacked out at this point, basically. But he's like, oh yeah, we'll just prostitute her. Like he's at this point of like desperation. He feels the law catching up with him. This comes right off his like emasculation by this police officer, and
Hmm.
he like is really wanting to like use his power. So who does he use it on? He uses it on her, and he uses it on the hotel staff. Once again, he's like he's reamping his power by doing the small tyrannies he's able to do. And like obviously Thompson doesn't think this is good, but I can't help but think about Thompson using his like small tyrannies he was able to do with his jobs, right? And like cracking the whip and mistreating secretaries and mistreating bellhops. Like he
Hmm.
did this shit too. this is not something that Thompson's just saying, look how bad this is. Like this is a real expression of Thompson's real personality.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I'm not
No, like
accusing him of rape necessarily. I don't know what Thompson did or didn't get up to. I don't know. I haven't looked into that, but I am saying
there,
the
yeah.
abuse is there.
There is a sexual assault that he gets accused of in
Okay.
1990. The charges are dropped. I don't know if there's anything to them. Like the person who relays it to us in the oral biography is the sister of one of his assistants, and she hated him.
I
And she
see.
said, "Yeah, it didn't go down that way."
Well,
But
what I do know is like whatever the truth is of those
mhm.
matters, I don't know about it. I do know the guy was constantly having sex with like his employees, right?
Oh
Like
yeah,
he was definitely there was definitely a consistent imbalance of power in his sexual relationships.
yes, he
And
liked it that
obviously
way.
he was harming people
Hmm.
physically. He was so like, this like libidinal expression of power over those less powerful than them in order to make himself feel like a big man because he is small is both a thing Thompson is critiquing
Oh yeah.
and also doing.
Oh yeah, no, I mentioned that he tried to stop his first wife Sandy from going to therapy. Like he would literally like the night before like he knew she was supposed to go to therapy, like he would like try to keep her from sleeping, so she'd
Jesus
like,
Christ.
crash the next day. Like it's bad. Like and the shit that he's getting up to the shit that he's getting up to, like suggesting they prostitute this teenage girl, Lucy, is also just not out of step with his sense of humor at all. Like,
Yeah.
there's a couple of factors to this. Like, he, one of his assistants slash girlfriends, eventually leaves him, moves to Moscow, gets a new job, and once he finds out that she's in Moscow, like, he faxes her like crazy shit covered with like pornography and swastikas, like stuff like, oh man, don't go over there and overthrow the Soviet government, that would be dangerous. Like he actually gets her visited and questioned by the KGB
Jesus
because of the shit that
Christ.
like she receives. Like, he's not above like bringing the hammer down on people just for entertainment. And yeah, like the same principle here. Like we can't forget that Dr. Gonzo is based on a real guy, and I think also the whole episode with the girl isn't out of step with his sense of humor because, like, Oscar Acosta, right? He doesn't feel he's safe in LA discussing the facts of the hit on Ruben Salazar, right? So what does Thompson do? He concocts this cover story that is even more incriminating, right? Oh, like we weren't in Vegas discussing the murder of this journalist by police. We were actually in Vegas, like trafficking this girl and like making plans to peddle her at this convention. Yeah, we weren't doing the one thing, we were doing the other. That's the sort of thing that he would like flippantly, come out with.
Sure. It just, obviously the black comedy of it doesn't hit quite the same when you like see the parallels to his own life.
Oh,
Um,
100%.
and also like, if you're his friend, it's like, that's the self-insert character you made of me? That's the okay. But I also think that it is telling, however telling Thompson does or doesn't think it is telling about something again of this hyper individualistic countercultural figure who has failed to kick up, so now endlessly kicks down, which is also a thing you see with a lot of like American liberals, right? Like a sort of radical end of liberals when they no longer have the capacity to exert their will over, say, the Democratic Party, they then turn to just like scolding language and picking on people and picking them apart and destroying people individually for like perceived or real slights. That this is a real thing that happens when people lose political power and have a very individualistic outlook of like their lives and who they should be and what they deserve to have.
Oh yeah, they turn around, they're like, "Oh, it was trans people that was making
Yeah.
like that was alienating people from voting for Democrats. It was anti-war people that are calling the Democrats out for their active and lockstep support for genocide, Not,
Mhm.
the party cannot fail, it can only be failed."
Yes, exactly right. So then you have the convention itself because they dump this girl, mistreat her, but she's gone from the narrative and just sort of doesn't get really addressed again. What happens next? Um,
There's a there's kind of a stop to to the anarchist element, to the leftist element of the American landscape here. A year or so earlier, I'd been to the Sky River Rock Festival in rural Washington, where a dozen stone broke freaks from the Seattle Liberation Front had assembled a sound system that carried every small note of an acoustic guitar, even a cough or the sound of a boot dropping on the stage, to half-deaf acid victims huddled under bushes a half-mile away. But the best technicians available to the National DA's convention in Vegas apparently couldn't handle it. Their sound system looked like something Ulysses S. Grant might have triggered up to address his troops during the siege of Vicksburg. The voices from up front crackled with a fuzzy, high-pitched urgency, and the delay was just enough to keep the words disconcertingly out of phase with the speaker's gestures. Again, he has that like instinctual respect for, people with no profit motive and people who are just like coming together and put on a rock show, knowing this technology better than the special body of armed men protecting property.
I also like you can tell he was there because I looked into this. The speakers, all real guys who spoke at this convention. Patrick Healy, that's a guy they know who is a quote GOP businessman type. Real guy, looked into his
Hmm.
bio, Korean War veteran, lawyer. When he died, worth noting, he asked people instead of spending any money on his funeral to send it to St. Jude. So I guess shout out to Healy for that, if not his politics.
He
Which is a
mentions, sorry to cut you off. Like I just remember he mentions Mike Gravel
mhm.
in Campaign Trail 72. That tells you how long that guy was around.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting though, like this is a and he doesn't know how Healy would live and die when he wrote this, but I
Right.
find it interesting, like looking back at the bio of this like random guy, Healy, how that's another example of this guy he's crossing paths with who is also like exerting his power in this system while trying to be like a fundamentally decent person, like, donating the money to St. Jude while also being like, a guy who is actively fighting for the legal system's right to just like crush people. And I feel like this is a guy that like his life, his actual life, Korea, uh, drug enforcement, far right, donate all the money to St. Jude feels very much like it rhymes with like the broad narrative here in a way that's like pretty interesting. But like, yeah, they have this convention and they spend some time there, but they hate it because they're like, you know, what is it like? Oh, well, they call the reefer butt a roach because it resembles a cockroach, and just it's very like reefer madness, dare, like you don't do drugs. Honestly, it's like very don't do drugs humor before like that was even like a mainstream like joke or meme, I feel like. So,
Hmm.
shout out to Thompson there. And they like storm out of the convention and just start bullshitting cops and being like, yeah, man. I know you're down in Georgia. It's pretty normal there, but around here, we got to behead criminals. They're sneaking into places and sacrificing people to Satan. And then they mention and take adrenochrome. So that felt like, very odd and whatchamacall. It all felt like it rhymed with QAnon a little bit in a kind of unintentionally funny way there.
You'd never believe it, said my attorney. In LA, it's out of control. First it was drugs, now it's witchcraft.
Classic. Once again, did Hunter S. Thompson cause the Satanic Panic? Who can say? So obviously, this whole conference doesn't go great for them, and they're running low on drugs, which means, they only have enough drugs to kill 10 men left in their car. So that means they're going to need to go to the dark side of Vegas. At that point, they're talking about the sort of politics of Vegas, and this is the closest he really gets to any kind of like class analysis here. It says, quote, the high side of Vegas is probably the most closed society west of Sicily, and it makes no difference in terms of the day-to-day lifestyle of the place, whether the man at the top is Lucky Luciano or Howard Hughes. In an economy where Tom Jones can make $75,000 a week for two shows a night at Caesars, the Palace Guard is indispensable, and they don't care who signs their paychecks. A gold mine like Vegas breeds its own army, like any other gold mine. Hired muscle tends to accumulate in fast layers around money/power poles. And big money in Vegas is synonymous with the power to protect it, power being capitalized. So once you get blacklisted on the strip for any reason at all, you either get out of town or retire to nurse your act along on the cheap in the shoddy limbo of North Vegas. Out there with the gun souls, the hustlers, the drug cripples, and all the other losers. North Vegas, for instance, is where you go if you need to score smack before midnight with no references. And it goes on for a bit, but now that he has this like moment here where it's interesting because his character is slightly less high for a few chapters than he normally is. Don't get me wrong, he's still high, but he's like mostly just like liquored up for a few chapters. He's not like full acid, whatever. And
And
he
alcohol is a depressant. The pace is not as frenetic.
yeah, so it's a little chiller. He's going around, he's exploring, he's this, that, and the other. Um, and he's able to slow down and have here and there a little analysis like this. Obviously, he's not doing, anything too in depth. He's saying gold mines create hired muscle, but we get the idea by reading this. And this is also where they remember for like 5 seconds that they're looking for the American dream.
Mhm.
Um, because after they get kicked out of a diner slash, threaten the waitress, and steal a cheesecake, I believe. They go to a taco stand. And at this is our like little taco shop, and they ask if they're authentic Mexican tacos, and the guy's like, "What the fuck are you talking about? It's meat, whatever." And they're like, "Is it the same thing as your burger?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's on a tortilla, whatever. Do you want it? It's five for $1." And they're like, "Okay, sure." So they get their tacos and they're asking here desperately where the American dream is. And they're like, "Well, American dream, do you mean that like madhouse down the way?" And they're like arguing this, that, and the other. And it turns out that the American dream location they were looking for burned down 3 years prior. Which like I have to note was at the time 1968, which was obviously the sort of failed attempt to do the coup at the Democratic National Convention by, the forces of various forces of the left. And it was also the election of Richard Nixon. So he has this moment here where I won't call this part slow. It's not slow, but he pauses from literally being in his car and crisscrossing hundreds of miles on cocaine to like do
Nixon
this for a minute.
Nixon, who, by the way, when he beat McGovern in 72, not in 68, but in 72, that was an even bigger landslide than I think, just in terms of electoral votes, than I think Reagan
Or
versus
FDR.
Mon. Yeah, then oh yeah, no. McGovern carried like Massachusetts and DC, and that was it.
Nixon was incredibly popular. Actually, the newest season of Blowback really gets into like how Nixon was able to solidify himself and then collapse so dramatically. So highly recommend season 5 of Blowback for all your Nixon needs. But Nixon needs. That's my next podcast. And you don't want to know what it's about. Thompson, like we established, fucking hates Nixon. I mean, he really fucking hates Nixon. With like a special ferocity that I don't like. I obviously understand hating Richard Nixon. I don't understand why this particular figure garnered so much ire from him, but it is like this thing that like recurs here, there, everywhere. Like it keeps coming back. And this is yet another example of it. Lenore, do you have any like thoughts on why Nixon is just so particularly odious? Because it's he doesn't have this same level of hatred for other figures that are pretty much identical to Nixon.
I mean, I think it's literally Vietnam, right?
Right.
I think
But he
Nixon
doesn't
just
do this with Johnson, though. He doesn't talk about Lyndon B. Johnson this way.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know why that is. I think Nixon himself, I think it's partly to do with the aesthetic side of Thompson, right? Here's somebody who very carefully crafted his image um as a freak, right? To run against a anti-drug sheriff in Aspen, right? Here's somebody who knew the voice that he had to cultivate, the appearance that he had to cultivate, the crowds that he had to draw and appeal to. He when he was debating that sheriff during the election, he deliberately like contrived to fill the crowd with like hippies. Um, I genuinely think like he just didn't think Nixon was cool. You know, Like, I mean, Johnson had that sort of character that, okay, like this is a like 6'4" madman who will like, make senators have meetings in his office like while he's taking a shit. He has that like attitude that you can kind of respect if you're in politics. But like Nixon is, he will do shit behind your back. Like he won't
Sure.
do, Hunter S. Thompson will like deliberately get you like questioned by the KGB, knowing that's what is going to happen when he's sending you like, pornography and all that.
And
And
swastikas and whatnot. Yeah.
yeah, you know, Nixon would just do that, but not have his name on the facts, and I
Sure.
genuinely think that Thompson does not respect that.
Makes sense. And this is also a section where he's reflecting on like failures of the counterculture and the failures and limitations of spirituality is around here. And it's in the middle of this chapter where they harass this random hotel worker. Um, but it's around the same place, but it's interesting. He's like reflecting on the failures of the counterculture, specifically that was super connected to drugs and psychedelics. And he says their loss, referring to this group, is a failure, and failure is ours too. What Leary, that's Timothy Leary, the psychedelic sort of Timothy Leary's his own can of worms, but y'all probably know broadly who I'm talking about. Took down with him was the central illusion of a whole lifestyle that he helped to create. A generation of permanent cripples, failed seekers, who never understood the essential old mystic fallacy of the acid culture, the desperate assumption that somebody or at least some force is tending that light at the end of the tunnel. This is the same cruel and paradoxically benevolent bullshit that has kept the Catholic Church going for so many centuries. It is also the military ethic, a blind faith in some higher and wiser authority, the Pope, the General, the Prime Minister, all the way up to God. One of the crucial moments of the 60s came on that day when the Beatles cast their lots with the
Let me see.
Maharishi, yeah? Maharishi, yeah. One of the crucial moments of the 60s came on that day when the Beatles cast their lot with the Maharishi. It was like Dylan going to the Vatican to kiss the Pope's ring. First gurus, then, when that didn't work, back to Jesus. And now, following Manson's primitive instinct, lead a whole new wave of clan type, commune, gods like Mel Lyman, ruler of Avatar, and what's his name, who runs Spirit and Flesh. Um, and then later he talks about the Angels. He says the Angels, talking about Hell's Angels, blew it in 65 at the Oakland Berkeley line when they acted on Barger's hard hat con boss instincts and attacked the front ranks of an anti-war march. This proved to be a historic schism in the then rising tide of the youth movement of the 60s. It was first open break between the greasers and the long hairs. And the importance of that break can be read in the history of SDS, which eventually destroyed itself in the doomed effort to reconcile the interests of the lower working class biker dropout types and the upper middle Berkeley student activists. And he goes on. But and this is a little bit gibberish here. Like this is just not what happened for the most part. Like this is not correct. But this is this guy who is I think Thompson does mostly believe everything he's saying here. You can't always separate it from the character, but I do think he believes this from his other writings. He is like basically not saying don't take the acid or don't be part of the counterculture, but scoffing at the idea of something more and that more, capital M more, right? And in this sense, he's talking about religion, but then he immediately swivels into SDS and he swivels into communes and I guarantee you, if you brought up something like Marxism or a belief in systems of history and stuff, he would reject that as part of this same stuff. He is sort of reveling here in this period where, before the final burst of energy at the end of this book, in this low dip, again, very intoxicated, but low depressant dip, he is reveling in his own cynicism. And he is like, I am actually smart and elevated and real and legit because I don't believe there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And he also doesn't believe in creating one. He just believes in like sitting in the like, this shit sucks. Which isn't particularly constructive, but it is interesting.
Yeah, his sympathies again are with the correct people, he's talked about by contemporaries of his as having big pictures of Che Guevara in his home. He mentions at one point in a letter to a friend that like, yeah, I think Marx had some good ideas, but like it's very surface level. It's very aesthetic in the ways that he engages with these things. Like to the degree that degree that he engages with these politics at all, he's very pessimistic about his ability to actually participate in them, and about the ability of the American working class to become the protagonists of history in that way.
And then they just like harass a hotel worker for like 5 pages.
Yeah,
Oh, and
yeah.
it's real brutal.
Hmm.
It's a lot. And there's not a lot to say about it aside from it's just hard to read and supposed to be so.
Yeah, and we haven't really gotten into his prose all that much as in and of itself, but I do want to highlight a little bit here that sort of I think is a keystone to his sense of humor, right? Um, when they're in the North Vegas diner, like right before they harass Proposition, the waitress there. There's a whole episode about that. I stole a copy of the Vegas Sun anyway. It was yesterday's edition, but I didn't care. The idea of entering a coffee shop without a newspaper in my hands made me nervous. There was
That
always the
is funny.
sports section. Yes, it is. Get wired on the baseball scores and pro football rumors. Bart Starr beaten by thugs in Chicago tavern. Packers seek trade. Namath quits Jets to be governor of Alabama. That, as far as I'm aware, didn't happen. And a speculative piece on page 46 about a rookie sensation named Harrison Fire out of Grambling. Runs the 109 flat, 344 pounds, and still growing. This man Fire has definite promise, says the coach. Yesterday, before practice, he destroyed a Greyhound bus with his bare hands, and last night he killed a subway. He's a natural for color TV. I'm not one to play favorites, but it looks like we'll have to make room for him. Indeed, there's always room on TV for a man who can beat people to jelly in 9 flats. But not many of these were gathered on this night in the North Star Coffee Lounge. And that's just how he writes. You know, he writes these things that are very plainly fantastical, but that nonetheless capture the vibe of what he's writing here, right? He eventually gets around to that, yeah, these people are larger than life, and that's what moves newspapers. And there's none of that energy here.
It's quite
There's
competent and it also sounds like an intoxicated person talking to you. It's like,
Yes.
no, dude, I swear to God, he's 344 pounds. He
Hmm.
runs in 9 seconds flat, and he like literally a Greyhound bus. Like, dude, he's so good. You know what I mean? Like, you can hear him saying that, but he's also a good enough writer that these sentences are tight enough to be eminently readable and enjoyable. Again, I'm pissed at this book, and I had a good time reading it. So he's now at this moment where like it's all really swirling around him and about to catch up with him, and they know it's all going to crumble down quite soon. His car's breaking, everything. He has to run his lawyer like out of the city to the hotel, and they almost miss the plane. So he, in a very pre 9/11 fashion, drives out onto the not that you could do this then either, drives out onto the plane tarmac and drops him off right next to the thing. Um, I don't know, like this is at the point where it's like kind of all wrapping, and at that point, he's he's escaping his debts by, he pawns off this car in the middle of the night on somebody. That's just completely torn to pieces. He tells some lies to get out of it. Um, and he spends a little time like just twitching in a bar reading about the quote, ship commanders butchered by natives after accidental assault on Guam. And in this newspaper he's reading, it says the five crewmen, including the captain, were diced up like pineapple meat in a brawl with the heroin police at the neutral point of Hong Si. Dr. Bloor, the ship's chaplain, presided over tense funeral services at the dawn on the flight deck. The Fourth Fleet Service Choir sang Tom Thumb's Blues. And then, while the ship's bells tolled frantically, the remains of the five were set afire in a gourd and hurled in the Pacific by a hooded officer known only as the commander. And then he says, why bother with newspapers as if this is all they offer? Agnew was right. The press is a gang of cruel faggots. Journalism is not a profession or a trade. It is a cheap catch-all for fuck-offs and misfits, a false doorway to the backside of life, a filthy, piss-ridden little hole nailed off by the building inspector, but just steep enough for a wino to curl up from the sidewalk and masturbate like a chimp in a zoo cage.
It beggars belief that this man did not have a podcast.
It's wild that like this got published in Rolling Stone.
Oh yeah.
I know, but I can really hear this guy like yeah, the far fringes of the dirtbag left here.
Mhm.
It's very like Adam Friedland show like type shit here. And and this is like where he just escapes. Like he makes his break. He's just like on some downers and says uppers are no longer stylish. Consciousness expansion went out with lead LBJ. Downers came in with Nixon. And then he's like, just breaking his way onto this plane. He walks through airport security with like a gun and a bunch of drugs. Nobody stops him because he's just charming enough. And then he passes by some Marines and yells, "God's mercy on you, swine." They looked at me and said nothing, but this time I was laughing crazy. It made no difference. I was just another fucked up cleric with a bad heart. Shit, they'll love me down at the Brown Palace. I took another hit off the ammo, and by the time I got to the bar, my heart was full of joy. I felt like a monster reincarnation of Horatio Alger, a man on the move, and just sick enough to be totally confident. And this is the bar right by the
Mhm.
airplane, waiting on his airplane out of Vegas, and he presumably gets out and publishes this in universe, and that's where it ends.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a deeply pessimistic note to end this on. And like, I mean, it's a thread that's really shot through this whole thing, like there is nothing but like figuring out how you can impress a girl whose job it is to sell you drugs. There's nothing but, if you're in pursuit of the American dream, there's nothing but figuring out how to have the fastest car, how to get the most hedonistic weekend out of Vegas and get away with it, and to be the one sane person in the room even as you're descending into this ether hole, right? um because at the end of the day, I mean, it really sums up here at the end of chapter 9, right? Reading the front page made me feel a lot better when he's reading about, like, war and torture and mass shootings and all that. Against that heinous background, my crimes were pale and meaningless. I was a relatively respectable citizen, a multiple felon perhaps, but certainly not dangerous. And when the great scorer came to write against my name, that would surely make a difference.
Mhm.
He's not, he refuses to be judged by this fundamentally sick society, yes, but it's not because John Brown refuse it's not because, like, John Brown, who refused to be judged by a slave society, right, and who sought to, destroy and overthrow and change it, right? It's somebody who's given up on changing it, who has, not put himself outside of it, but figured out how to exist within it and to thumb his nose at it, even while he's repeatedly bailed out by the wealthy patrons that it, produces and who run it, right? You know, it's somebody who refuses to be judged, entirely in retrospect, who says history will vindicate me, not because of the things that I do to take an active role in it and to, push for the betterment of the masses, but because somebody can look back and be like, "Nah."
Yeah, exactly right. And he even does that with Horatio Alger, the children's authors, who he references at the end, who writes these like happy-go-lucky rags to riches books, like the Ragged Dick series. And which is wild that his he wrote this in the 1800s, so the joke would have been lost on him. He wrote the Ragged Dick series, he wrote Tattered Tom, he wrote Adrift to New York, Only an
Tattered
Irish
Tom, you
Boy.
have a ragged dick.
Yeah, probably so. But he wrote these stories about kids who were poor, who, because of America and like in good nature and hard work, they had good lives and they came out on top. And it was very like a kind of like 19th century like boxcar children type thing. Nothing wrong with it, far as I remember. but don't quote me on that. There's probably some like racist shit in there or something for all I know. Yeah, so like don't at me, but like but my point is he's like a, he name checks this guy at the end because it's even this like getting a chuckle, right? This like American dream story, and he's a horrifying reincarnation of it, of this guy that unlike, what's his name? Like Ragged Dick, unlike Ragged Dick, even though he, you know, the joke's there, he's not, just some poor little urchin who gets his way to a good life, right? He is this wretched guy who continues to be wretched, and he just wretcheds his way into success because that's
Hmm.
just the kind of world they're in, and that's funny. And therefore, he will be vindicated, like you said. And I think that's like very interesting that he does this like weird name check that I had to like research at the end. Very weird and a very strange and dark conclusion to this book, that I enjoyed reading and once again pissed me off. And I also just think that it's not that. Here's what I will say. Here's what I'll say in my kind of overall on this. I think it's well written. I think it's interesting. I just don't think, though, that it's that intellectually interesting and that it actually has that much to say. Because ultimately, just raw cynicism does not interest me very
Hmm.
much. And this idea of it's all fucked, look, it sucks. Not like really why it sucks, not really getting into that. Just like, man, the American dream is bullshit, bro. That's what this all just feels like to me. And it's just like, okay. And so what? And it just revels in it for page after page in a way that to me, like if he was not just such a talented writer that he can do all his tricks, I think that this would just be really real slop. And it's
Hmm.
not because he's so good at what he does, but there's just not that much interesting analysis here beyond America is hypocritical and America is hyper consumerist and we're all fucked and we lost our last chance a few years ago, and why don't we just all give into this pessimistic, 1970s version of the black pill, which is, some type of uppers probably. And I don't know. That's not that interesting to me. And I just don't like, I don't come away uh, impressed or particularly moved by that narrative. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, um I keep coming back to the introduction of Gonzo, the biography written by Johnny Depp, right? Who says here, it's a very hagiographic um piece written by a close personal friend of his. And it says, there are those of you who, based on Hunter's journeys and the mad stories that surround his life and memory, the excess and wild rantings of his lifestyle, might think that he was simply some hedonistic lunatic, or, as he always put it, an elderly dope fiend. I promise you he was not. He was a southern gentleman, all chivalry and charm. He was a hilarious and rascally little boy, a truth seeker. He was a hypersensitive medium who miraculously channeled the underlying current of truth buried in lies that we had become accustomed to believing. Like it's I read this and my single note is a single word, train spotting, right? You know,
Hmm.
it's something, it's somebody, it's a person whose conduct and whose outbursts and whose refusal to be constrained by human decency, even as he's effectively a court jester on a leash. It's somebody who it only makes sense if you can it only makes sense and only truly entertains you if you can match that energy and if you can enable that
Hmm.
energy, right? And it is a real shame that, again, if you read a piece like Louisville, a southern city with northern problems, or any of his like articles from South America, right? It's disappointing, I think, in the same way that he himself was disappointed in the failure of the anti-war movement to affect um, more lasting change here.
Yeah.
And of course, you're all the more disappointed if you, as he does, reduce these movements to single, particularly fantastical figures who turn out, not to live up to their potential, because there's a whole ecosystem of radicalism beyond, the Thompsons of the world. There,
100%.
yes, there are organizations, there are schools of thought, there are people and groups who are much more disciplined than a lot of people could ever hope to be, and they are doing good work and they are building relationships, and they are, there is it is not a whole and monolithic piece, but there is an engine that is guiding the
Sure.
masses to something better. And it is a shame that, Thompson never really grasped or believed in it.
And I think also that this is where anti-authority sentiment without any tie to anything else will inevitably lead you, right? And like without any ideology. I don't even just mean anti-authority, like, there are principled anarchists in the world, right? That behave themselves like human beings, you know? I don't even mean like just anti-authority leading you to this. I mean like if your entire politics is raging against the man, capital T, capital M, and that's it, that's all of it. And when you've decided the man is invincible, just kind of collapsing on the floor in a heap and expressing your power in the little ways, and just being so sad about it, this is where you go. This is what happens when you have no principles that are particularly guiding you despite raging against, the system and having no future, no vision.
You take it
Um,
out on your neighbors by, shooting, your fucking firearms at all hours. You take it out on your
exactly.
assistants who, slap around and like try and get, questioned by the fucking KGB, right?
Yes. So
It's
this is why you have principles and you get involved and you do work with other people with some kind of collective vision. Do you have any final thoughts, Lenore? Because if not, I have something to sort of bring us out on. Something I sort of something that's been kind of eating at my mind here.
oh, please, please.
Well, I'm just kind of thinking, like bright light city, it is gonna set my soul on fire. And I do have a lot of money that is ready to burn. So we do need to get those stakes up higher. Okay. You following me?
No,
Um,
but go on.
there are 1,000 pretty women waiting out there. That's true. And they are all living devil may care. And so I'm just the devil with love to spare. So, Viva Las Vegas. And if I might say it again, Viva Las Vegas.
Viva. Que viva.
That's
Y'all have a good
even
one.
that's even funnier if you've heard the version by the Dead Kennedys that adds a bunch of references to cocaine.
Y'all have a good one, everybody.
Peace out.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.